All right. Hello, everybody. Today we're going to be talking about emphasizing player skill and strategic choices in CSGO level design. We're community level designers for Counter-Strike. We have 5 levels that ship with Valve CSGO. Here's some pictures. I'm actually a professional player, or I was, and here's some pictures of me competing and some of Shawn's maps that he's worked on. So I'm Sal Garozzo. You might know me as Volcano if you were involved in the Counter-Strike world at all. I have over a decade of experience as an eSports pro gamer, as well as community level design work as well. And this is Shawn Snelling. He's got over a decade of experience making levels for all sorts of games. So the first thing I want to talk about is building levels to last. And the main thing that deals with is letting player skill shine through via strategic depth. So how many of you here are familiar with or have played Counter-Strike before? All right, so basically everybody. So I'll keep it pretty brief on this. So CS is a first-person shooter. It's a round-based game. Each round is 1 minute and 45 seconds long, and counter-terrorists or CTs play as defense. They have to defend the bomb site. Terrorists or Ts are the offense. They have to plant the bomb, make sure that it explodes. That's how they win the round. So there's a distinct strategy for both teams each round. So defense, they have setups, they have pushes, they have all that. And terrorists have to worry about coordinating attacks, breaching bomb sites, faking attacks, and things like that. And it's the most popular PC-based FPS in esports right now. And a large part of that is due to community involvement, whether it be through level design, players competing in online leagues, people hosting LAN tournaments, and everybody attending them, sponsors, everything like that. A large part of this success is due to the community. So what is Cache? Cache is the map that Shawn and I created. This is an overview of it. It's a very successful third-party map, so it has about 12,000 or so hours logged each day of gameplay. Probably more now, since that's an old stat, and the game is growing pretty consistently. So when you see this on the left, that's the counter-terrorist spawn point, and on the right is where the terrorists spawn. So it's a standard 3-lane layout. The middle is probably where the most action takes place. And then you have a bomb site A on the top, bomb site B on the bottom. Each of them have about 2 or 3 choke points entrance. So if you see this, I like to think of a central dividing line of battle, like a line of scrimmage almost on the map. I think a lot of the successful maps do have this because it's a 5-on-5 game. So you have 5 terrorists and 5 counter-terrorists. If you have too many choke points, it's too much to defend. The gameplay just gets very chaotic and it's less strategic, even though you might think it would be more because there's more options. But each option matters a lot less if there's too many of them. So I found 4 choke points. 4 central choke points is about the right number. You could probably make 3 work. 5 could probably work too. I mean, if you know what you're doing, you could probably get it to work. So it's important to know how Counter-Strike is played on the professional level. Terrorists will set up into what's called the default strategy. So since there's 5 of them, they might have 1 guy watching B, 1 or 2 guys dedicated to the middle, and then another 2 dedicated to A. And what they do is hold for pushes. Since the counter-terrorists can also play dynamically as well. They can push and gain ground. Once they do that, they know that attack is not coming to that bomb site, and they can rotate defenders. So it's important for terrorists to start out in a static defense and prevent CTs from doing that. That's important for level design, as I said, because if there's too many areas, then you can't meaningfully watch all of them. And Counter-Strike's a very punishing game, so if you're caught looking the wrong way, you're as good as dead, basically. The time to kill is very short, so you can die in 1 bullet from almost any gun in the game if it hits you in the head. So too many areas of danger at once is a bad thing. You want to be able to divide and conquer, and what I mean by that is if you're being exposed to a choke point, you only want 1 or 2 spots that you have to worry about before you can move on to the next section. So you kind of sweep from right to left if you were coming out, and to be able to do that and clear each spot individually is very important. So this is an overview of bomb site A on DE Cache. You see there's only 5. There's a little bit more, but there's about 5 common spots. So it doesn't sound like much, but it actually is, because when you see where there's line of sight overlaps, so those are called crossfires, and anywhere where there's an overlapping line, you're going to be put in a difficult spot as an attacker because you're going to have to check more locations than you can possibly do at once. And as I said, it's a punishing game, so if you're looking the wrong way, you're going to die, most times at least. So 5 or so common points is probably about enough. What I see a lot of new level designers doing in Counter-Strike is putting cover almost everywhere. And it makes sense. You would think that having a lot of cover is a good thing, but it's actually probably worse to have too much cover than too little in Counter-Strike. The next thing I want to talk about is verticality in Counter-Strike, because as level designers, we always hear how important it is to make sure you have a lot of verticality in your levels. It creates more dynamic gameplay. But going back to what I said before, since CS is so punishing, even just a little bit of verticality goes a long way. And the other thing to know is in Counter-Strike, people use extremely low sensitivities. I didn't bring my mouse pad with me today, but it's probably about the width of this podium. And I use the whole thing when I'm playing Counter-Strike. That's how low people use their mouse sensitivity. So it's even more exaggerated in this game. If somebody's looking the wrong way, they have almost no chance of winning the fight because they're so focused on precision that it's difficult to do 180s very quickly. But CS does allow verticality to be used in interesting ways that not a lot of other games do have. So one of these ways is stacking and boosting. So what stacking is you can actually get on top of your teammate's head. And you can do that. Either you can just stand there, and then there's 2 people with their guns in the same line of sight, or you can actually use their head as an intermediate platform to get on an even higher location. And not only that, you can actually look over. So on cache, we have a container. People can stack behind it and actually look over the container in a location you wouldn't expect somebody to be able to see over. And I think stacking and boosting is really cool and good for CS because it does encourage planning and teamwork. You have to be on the same page with your teammate. You have to coordinate at the start of the round to pull it off, because if you're late, you're just going to be 2 sitting ducks out in the middle of the open, free kills for your enemies. And here's an old picture of boosting at 1.5. It doesn't exist in CSGO anymore, which is probably a good thing because you can probably do a lot of exploits and things like that. But this is kind of the legacy of it. So now in CSGO, you can actually only do it with 1 other person. And something to illustrate what I'm talking about with all of these things I've talked about, with how CS is punishing and how verticality is very powerful, is there's a member of Cloud9 called Shroud, and at a LAN tournament pretty recently, he was in a situation where his team was losing by 1 round, and if they won that round, they'd go to overtime. And all he had was a pistol. So let's take a look and see what he did. Whoops.
Shroud wants to, but I think he thinks he's in a spot that they don't know about, so he's sticking there hoping that they push through the smoke. But they're alternating. Oh, no, they're coming back.
iBuyPower cannot afford to make the same mistake they made earlier in the game. 25 seconds left. If the clock runs out on them and they give up overtime, it will be the heartbreak of a generation. Molotov's in, set piece out. Shroud has let them all pass. 1, 2, 3! Oh, James is the last one alive! Oh, that is tied it! They're going to overtime!
Oh, my God. Huge play by Shroud right there.
So that kind of goes over everything I've said so far. All it is a guy with a pistol in an insanely tense situation, thousands of dollars on the line, and it's just 1 box that he's on. He's not on like the top of a building in a sniper tower, and he kills 3 people in what feels like 1 or 2 seconds. So yeah, CS is a very punishing game, and you need to keep that in mind if you're a level designer and not put too much verticality around the level, and just be very mindful of all of those elements and how they play out in CS. The next thing I want to speak about is trick jumps, because this is something that CS does pretty well. So what a trick jump is it's a way to manipulate your movement in midair to gain extra distance on a jump. And this allows players to showcase mechanical skill, because you do have to practice this. You can't just jump in the game and expect to make a trick jump. It takes hours of practice to get it right. And it's really interesting because it lets players express themselves in a way that's not just twitch reflexes and raw motor skill with aiming and positions and stuff like that. It shouldn't be too powerful or exclusive. So what I mean is, don't have a trick jump that gives you insane amounts of power, or there's no way to achieve the same effect without doing a trick jump. So on Cash, we have a trick jump, which I'll show you in just a second, but you can do it with a teammate. A teammate can just boost you and you'd have the same access. It's not something that you need to do. And it's most effective in moderation, so you shouldn't have 10 trick jumps on your map. Maybe 1, 2, 3 would be the max, I would say. 1 or 2 is probably a good amount. So on Cash, you can see where it says 1, that's where you start. So you run along that garage overhang, and then it requires a trick jump onto an AC hanging on the wall there as the second step, and a second trick jump from 2 to 3. So it's very difficult to pull off, but if you do it right, it actually lets you flank the enemy team. You can go over that roof and get behind enemy lines, which is really useful. But it's extremely dangerous, and it's noisy, too, since you're running on metal surfaces. The next way to add some strategic depth to your maps is through wall banging, which is just a name that the CS community came up with. It's kind of silly, but all it means is shooting through walls. And this is another way to allow players to showcase their creativity. So basically, it uses the rifle or pistol's ammo as a way to determine if a bullet should go through a surface. And this is really useful, and we use it here on Crown. The reason it's useful is because it gives players another way to clear a spot without having to get actually behind it and check it themselves with their eyes. They can shoot a few bullets into it. If somebody dies, they know it's clear, and if nobody dies, they know it's clear as well. So we baked it into Crown here with this doorway. It's a very powerful spot to camp behind, but you do notice there's 2 little boxes on either side of the door, and we made that a wooden material which bullets can penetrate. And you can clear both sides of the door without actually having to go through it. The downside is you make a lot of noise, you're using bullets, you're letting the enemy know where you are. But like I said, it's another element that players have in their toolbox. They don't have to do that, but they can do it. The bomb planting zones are another very important. I mean, it's the main objective of CS, and a lot of people don't really consider the implications of manipulating the bomb zones. So a lot of extra thought here. It can go a long way. The more exposed a bomb plant is, the more difficult it is to actually plant, but that means you can cover it from more locations as well. So let's take a look here at Cache. So the default bomb plant spot is tucked in between the red box and the missile crates, which is extremely safe. Almost nobody dies there when they're planting because you can't be seen from anywhere. But the downside to that is if a defender is actually defusing the bomb, you have to run very, very far out from where your cover is, and it puts you in a really bad spot. So you're trading convenience earlier on for difficulty later on. The next spot here, if you plant it just a little bit more to the left, actually gives you a great place to cover it from the main location that terrorists attack from. It's just a lot more difficult to plant there. So you can see the trade-off clearly. And then the most extreme example is on this side, which is exposed directly to where counter-terrorists rotate in from. So it's very difficult to pull off. What you see teams doing is throwing smoke grenades there and just blindly running in their smokes and planting. But it does give you the best spot to cover the bomb from. You can cover it from almost anywhere on the map. So that's it for my part of the talk. So just to tie things up, this stuff is very specific to Counter-Strike, but you can use it in any game. You just have to make sure you have a good understanding of the mechanics of your game and how your players are actually using the product, and listen to their feedback, because it's really important.
Hello. All right. Hi. So I just, if I may, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Shawn. I'm a level designer and environment artist with over 10 years of experience making levels for games. And I had the honor and the privilege of working with Sal. And I really view it that way because, you know, Sal is very much a legend in the Counter-Strike scene. You know, he's been playing the game since it was basically released and playing at the highest levels and making maps for the game. So I can't even begin to tell you everything I learned from that collaboration. And it was really meaningful to me. So what it taught me is, among other things, that every level design decision matters to the pros. You know, in Counter-Strike, rewarding player skill has to be a top priority. Every aesthetic decision is in some way a design decision. And therefore, in CSGO, the line between art direction and level design becomes very heavily blurred. So I'd like to talk to you about a specific example from Cache, the level we worked on. sort of the compromise process that Sal and I went through. I had a vision and an art direction that the map would take place in Chernobyl and sort of the surrounding areas of Chernobyl. So this is sort of the initial direction that I came up with for the level. But Sal took a little bit of an issue with it, and he sort of educated me on the fact that, and gave me some perspective in the sense that, these players are playing these maps day in, day out. As, Cash, we mentioned like 12,000 hours a day logged on this level. So, he felt it was really important that players not be, players are just like anybody else. They want to be happy, They don't want to be bogged down with, too much of a depressing, gloomy environment. And so, he really helped me modulate the art direction for this level. And we got to something a little bit, maybe if it's not totally cheerful, it's at least a little bit less bleak and a little bit more neutral in the tone of it. And I believe it was a much better result than the one that I, just as a level designer who wasn't considering pro feedback, would have gotten to without his help. So I'd like to talk a little bit about readability. And obviously a little bit of a definition here. So readability, the ability to easily distinguish players against the background, in this case the environment of a map. And this is sort of a related concept. In TF2 there's 9 classes and each class is distinct. So Valve, as I've read, they sort of, in designing these characters, wanted to make sure that each silhouette would be unique and identifiable so that players would be able to make snap judgments based on the silhouettes that they were able to identify against the background. And so that really goes to show like the importance of being able to identify players in a rapid manner. And in Counter-Strike, it's even more important because if you can't see your opponent, it's like what Sal talked about, you can die very quickly. And so those split seconds are critical, and pro players are very very mindful, and they have very high expectations on the design side of what those things end up looking like. And it just goes back to this concept of Counter-Strike as an esport. So there are many hidden perks to creating readable environments. Readable environments improve the player experience, and improving player experience really has to be a holistic endeavor. Readable levels enhance the player experiences by reducing that psychological principle of cognitive dissonance, where players might not be able to articulate exactly why they don't like a level, but they don't like a level, and they know they don't. And as level designers, we have to study that and understand why and try and avoid that. And it relates back to the concept of players as competitors. When players in Counter-Strike, they don't even play maps. That's maybe a key thing to point out, is they don't play maps, they practice maps. Because they're thinking already about competition and competing with one another. So instead of fighting other players and the level, a well-designed level can fade into the background and allow player interactions to come to the forefront, which is really what players prefer in the first place. So who here has played Dust 2? Okay, that sounds about right. So Dust 2 is really the top dog in Counter-Strike. It's really the default level of a game, which is, for a shooter game, it's almost unusual. So some facts about Dust 2. It's easily the most played map in Counter-Strike history. It's an excellent map by any means. It's got a memorable theme. It's got a clean and highly readable presentation. It's got a flawless layout, time-tested. It is, by all means, the Counter-Strike map. So one of the keys to Dust 2's enduring success is its simplicity and its minimalism. Here you can see Dust 2's middle. It's very straightforward and easy to digest. And so that really harkens back for me what I consider the wisdom in minimalization. When you have extremely simple digestible geometry, when you have desaturated textures which trend towards white, when you have contrast which is heightened towards path exits, and minimal elsewhere, that really aids in player navigation without getting in the way of the level. And it really makes it extremely challenging for other levels to compete. When I'm designing levels, I have to compete against Dust 2 in this sort of, this Pantheon, this classic map. So why is Dust 2 such a classic? It elegantly merges form with function. It accepts the premise that players crave interaction with other players as their paramount concern. And it merges player demands for readability and fantasy by creating an effective and believable environment. And for me, this is really the takeaway. This is the process that I've come to working with Sal, working on Counter-Strike specifically, this concept of improving readability how it allows for a reduction in cognitive dissonance, which creates positive association with players and demonstrates high value to players in the way that Dust 2 demonstrates high value to players. That improves player retention, and it can have the consequence of making your level more popular than the rest. So at the end of the day, is there any room to compete with Dust 2? It's difficult. You have to merge form with function as effectively as Dust 2 does. You have to somehow create even higher levels of player evaluation. But how? For me, it's been about by focusing on the room for improvement. So minimalism, a la Dust 2, can be weakness. I mean, Dust 2 is a very effective level. It's ruthlessly effective. But as an artist, I don't know that I personally consider Dust to be that aesthetic of a level. It's very effective, maybe realistic, but I don't find it to be particularly aesthetic. So for me, on a project I worked on called Season, I really wanted minimalism to be the strength. If you look at a game like Deus Ex or Mirror's Edge, the minimalism there is really one of the key strengths of that aesthetic. And I believe, sort of taking a page out of that book, I was able to get to a more effective result. So for me, this is the holy grail for CSGO level designers. It's an aesthetic blend of form with function, purity of experience, which goes back to readability, with a clear artistic vision. But there is a problem. Totally readable or somewhat desaturated environments feel false or fake or artificial. Or they're not real. They don't seem real. For me, the solution was to go back to the idea of merging form with function. So this is a screenshot of Season's A bomb site. And it accepts that sort of artificiality, and it goes towards a laboratory theme. And we see areas like this in our lives, maybe not this extreme or stylized, but clean environments. So for me, aesthetic minimalism really embodies the goal. You see it in games like Team Fortress 2. You see it in games like Deus Ex. This idea of aesthetic minimalism. So there are other advantages of effective aesthetic design. And that is that details are free to be details, but they're also free to be more than just details. So skyboxes are not just decoration anymore, they're design. Here you can see on Season an example of the radio tower in the background there and Mount Fuji. Now this is accomplishing a lot of different things all at once. In Counter-Strike, smoke grenades, flash grenades, Molotovs, these are really critical gameplay components that any pro will tell you about. I'll start wrapping it up here. So anyways, basically you can line up grenades using this tower, and it relates back to the theme of the level, and it relates to the gameplay element. So effective skyboxes evoke design truths. They're out of the way. They're magnified by readability. They aid in the fiction. They enhance gameplay features like grenades. And CSGO truly does present entirely new opportunities for excellent skybox design. Here's the skybox on Cache. You can see it relates back to Chernobyl. On Season, Fuji, which obviously this level takes place in Japan. Overpass, which is a Valve level. They have the Berlin TV tower. Again, that's communicating the theme. It's also critical for gameplay, and I'll demonstrate why. Here you can see, tying back to the idea, when form meets function, players see value. And that is an example of somebody lining up a smoke grenade using the radio tower and overpass. So thank you very much, and this is how you can contact us.